What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Occupy Fantasy Football Podcast, Week 14 edition. Season is flying by. I think we say that every week, so I think everyone knows that by now. I'm Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy, your co-host of the Occupy Fantasy Football Podcast, joined as always by our NFL Daily Plug writer and my co-host here, Chris Rooney. What's happening, Chris?
Ryan, we're just so excited to keep talking about football here in week 14, even though week 13 is not yet over. We are recording this before, obviously, the Cowboys-Ravens game, but we just want to dive into this and really get into the week 14 slate. So why don't we do that?
Yeah, so normally we do record these on Wednesdays, but this is Tuesday afternoon. But not much changes from Tuesday to Wednesday. What we're going to do in this episode, like we do every single week, is talk about the injuries from week 13 and how that impacts the main slate for week 14. Talk about some running back backfields and see what has shifted as far as workloads and playing time goes. Then we'll jump into a high-level view of the Week 14 main slate with the betting markets and the highest totals and the biggest favorites. And then normally we have our underperforming receivers section, our tight ends to target, and we'll finish off with Chris's game stacks to target for Week 14. So, Chris, let's jump into it with Week 14 injuries, or Week 13 injuries, rather.
Mhm.
Fortunately, pretty low-key slate as far as injuries go. Probably the most impactful was last night, Monday night, with Antonio Gibson, who left the game early, and they ruled him out pretty quickly with a toe injury.
Yeah, Antonio Gibson hurt his
Yeah.
toe. Starting the show off strong here, Brian, with some of these puns. It's going great. I think the thing that was surprising to me about that though was just how much J.D. McKissic played. I think a lot of us were expecting to see, Peyton Barber, every NFL coach's between the tackles grinder that they love to kind of throw in there when they get a chance. He didn't actually play as much as we expected. McKissic, 70% of the snaps, 10 plus targets, ran a route, and over 70% of Alex Smith's dropbacks in that game. So if Antonio Gibson misses the game against the 49ers, this might be a really interesting spot, specifically on DraftKings, which is PPR friendly, which is who JD McKissic is.
Yeah, I mean, when Alex Smith took over, I think 4 or 5 games ago, we saw a 15 target game from J.D. McKissic. We saw a 14 target game from J.D. McKissic, and then last night picked up the 10 targets as well. And maybe that's a little bit game script driven last night, but again, the 2 games where he saw 14 and 15 targets weren't necessarily the case. So either way, he's going to get playing time in this backfield if Antonio Gibson does miss against San Francisco. Now, a running back that we probably, well, you did tout him on the Periscope, and I'll say tout because you said one sentence about him on the Periscope Sunday morning. Old man Frank Gore, he was knocked out pretty much immediately with a concussion in that game against the Raiders, and then Terp alum Ty Johnson actually filled in pretty admirably.
Of course, you had to get in the Maryland Terrapins reference there. I'm not going to put that past you. I mean, look, touting Frank Gore. I mean, someone asked for best plays below a certain price. I think it was on FanDuel. I probably should not have said Frank Gore's name there, but he was one of the only guys available. And it was a great spot. And obviously, that's why Ty Johnson went off in that game, right? So if Gore's going to miss some time, I think we are going to be interested in Ty Johnson just because he's not 87 years old. And we'll see what he can do down the stretch here for the Jets if he gets a larger role. The situation from week 13, I think most people are still waiting for some clarification on, is the quarterback situation with the Philadelphia Eagles. Brian, Carson Wentz has been, I mean, let's be nice. He's been miserable. I mean, that's actually the nicest thing I can say about it. He is just missing open reads. He's just not hitting his receivers. He's just forcing balls into coverage. And it looks like Doug Peterson finally got sick of it against the Packers in week 13. They put in Jalen Hurts to finish out the game. He executed a really nice touchdown drive when he wasn't running for his life because the Eagles' offensive line is also trash, which is contributing to problems for both of these guys, frankly. I mean, what do you make of this situation? Are they going to finally make the switch here and go to Hurts? And even if they do we have much interest in the Eagles right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, they need something, right? And we're not here to talk about real life football and what this means for the Eagles. We're here to talk about what it means for DFS. But I will say, if you do have offensive line issues, at least have a more mobile quarterback like Jalen Hurts who can escape and make plays. And we saw that against the Packers. So I think Peterson will make the switch. He has yet to name a starting quarterback, and I guess people are saying that when he's failed to name a starting quarterback on Tuesday or Wednesday in the past, he has made the change, so it likely indicates that Jalen Hurts will get the start. I think it at least boosts the pass catchers for Philly. Jalen Rager, we saw him get a deep shot finally on target.
Mhm.
Dallas Goddard. And we'll talk about Miles Sanders here in a bit. And I don't know, you're the low risk projections guy. I don't know if you run it yet for Week 14 with Jalen Hurts there, but I'm interested to see if he could be a low risk type quarterback given his running ability.
Price this week, right? I mean, that's the other factor here. He's pretty affordable on both sites. So definitely going to look at that a little closer. And that is a good reason for all of you listening and watching out there to come back and check out our daily plug on Friday and see if Jalen Hurts makes the cut. Brian, we have 2020 strikes again, right? Some coronavirus inactives popping up with the Carolina Panthers this time. DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel both on the restricted list for the Panthers. Don't think they're going to clear in time based off of whatever the NFL's window is now for guys to remain out to play in Week 14. So that means we should see a lot of Robbie Anderson. We might have Christian McCaffrey back in the fold for the Panthers here. And then we're probably going to be looking closer at the back end of this Panthers receiver depth chart here for some other options, right?
Yeah, so DJ Moore was kind of questionable anyways. He hurt his ankle before the bye week. So at least he'll probably get another week off. And maybe that's poor wording because he's on the COVID list, and that's not really fortunate for anybody. But we don't know exactly who's tested positive and who's just a close contact as of the time of this recording. I think 8 players were placed on the COVID list, 3 tested positive. We'll see. For those who didn't test positive, they may or may not be cleared. But as of right now, DJ Moore, Curtis Samuel, likely to miss the game. Robbie Anderson gets that boost. We'll look at Brandon Zylstra, who used to play for the Vikings. We played him a lot in preseason too. He would be the number 2 receiver here in a low-key stackable game against the Broncos in Week 14. And again, you did mention Christian McCaffrey. He's going to practice on Wednesday. They said sounds like he's aiming to return, and he's not the only big-name guy in the league that's aiming to return this week. Chris, we could possibly see Drew Brees back. I don't know if it's going to be this week, maybe next week, but it'll be interesting to monitor.
Yeah, so he's eligible to be activated from injured reserve. I don't think we've seen anything that says New Orleans is actually going to do that. And honestly, I think, surprised as I think both of us are, as well as Taysom Hill has played for them, they may actually take the extra week here and give Brees some extra time to get right. I mean, their matchup here is against the Eagles in Week 14. I think these are 2 teams that are headed in opposite directions as far as their seasons are concerned. The reason we're going to pay close attention to this, Brian, as we're about to talk more about running backs in general around the league, I do think Drew Brees returning to the lineup for the Saints is great news for Alvin Kamara. We've seen his target volume completely dry up with Taysom under center now. So I think that's honestly, to me, the biggest thing to watch with that situation.
Yeah, and maybe Michael Thomas gets a bump down with Drew Brees coming back, which is insane to think about given his volume with Taysom Hill. So let's talk about these backfield situations. It's hilarious. We have an ongoing joke in our staff chat, our Occupy Fantasy staff chat, about the Rams backfield. Seemingly every week, Sean McVay gives a quote in a press conference or an interview. He's like, yeah, we got to get Cam Akers more touches. And then inevitably the next game he gets like 4 carries. And every time we pop up in the staff chat the next day, it's like, this is Cam Akers backfield now after he got 5 touches. But Chris, I think it's actually Cam Akers' backfield now in Week 14.
Yeah, we're 75% of the way through the season, but finally time to get Cam Akers involved, right? 63% of the snaps in that game last week for the Rams, 21 carries to 6 the week before. Now, something that did sort of play into this is at some point during that Rams game, I guess Darrell Henderson had, a knee injury, and so I think we're going to watch that. I believe he returned to the game and had a few nice plays, so I'm not worried about it, but who knows, short week, maybe the Toradol wore off there, and now Henderson's really nursing, a tough injury there. So this is the Thursday night game against the Patriots with the Rams, but as you mentioned, it does look like it is finally Cam Akers' backfield. He may be the best Rams running back to roster in low risk on that showdown single game slate on FanDuel and DraftKings. Miami Dolphins, Brian, we finally got one of my low-key favorite players in the league out of nowhere, Myles Gaskin back in the lineup. Dominated the touches, dominated the playing time, 71% of snaps, 61% of the opportunities to touch the football in the backfield for the Dolphins. Didn't do a whole hell of a lot with it, which was disappointing. Something that I am concerned about is the fact that he only had 2 targets from Tua Tagovailoa, the lowest he had seen all season so far. Maybe that's just I don't know, a bad break, right? I mean, I still think Gaskin's going to be a fine play this week, especially in what should be a faster paced game against the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah, you got to like Gaston again. He dominated opportunity as expected. We told you, in this show last week in the Daily Plug, literally every piece of content we put out, that Gaskin, although just returning from the injured list, was going to play a ton with the other Dolphins running backs out, and him having 2 weeks to condition and practice with the team. He did that. Got really unlucky as far as touchdowns go. Had a bunch of carries inside the 10, didn't convert. But he's the guy we want to look at in this backfield moving forward, and he continued his dominance from before his sprained MCL. Let's go to Indy, a team we can never really figure out with Jonathan Taylor, Nyheim Hines, Jordan Wilkins. Jonathan Taylor caught the long touchdown pass on 4th down last week. I honestly haven't dug too deep into it yet. Have we seen any changes into the guard as far as how they're using these backs?
We're all still playing a decent amount, although this was the first time I think in a while when all three are active, there's been somewhat of a clear edge. Jonathan Taylor played 48% of the snaps for the Colts in week 13 against the Texans, had 50% of the running back touches. And he's looked really good. He's had a couple of good games in a row now for the Colts, at least as far as, box score is concerned. Everybody can see that. So I do think finally, we stepping back from the Colts for a second, we're in the second half of the season. Jonathan Taylor is a rookie in the NFL, and this is usually when we start to see most rookies start to really figure it out, right? So Jonathan Taylor seems to be seizing the opportunity and the role as running back one for the Colts here. And they've got some big games here down the stretch, so this might not be the last time that we talk about him, frankly, which is why it was important to sort of go through that here for you. Another team that is still a contender down the stretch, the Las Vegas Raiders. They did not have their star running back, Josh Jacobs, against the New York Jets in week 13. Devontae Booker played a lot less than we expected, Brian.
Yeah, just 40% of the snaps for Booker. But he got 80% of the touches. Jalen Richard, who hadn't played a lot in recent weeks, was dealing with a chest injury. He came back, actually pretty much got the same amount of snaps, 40%. And in a game where the Raiders were actually competitive against the Jets, I guess the Jets were competitive with the Raiders, and that turned the tables a bit on what we expected from Booker, more of a control the clock in the second half, a great matchup against the Jets as a near touchdown or a near double-digit favorite against the worst team in the league. Jets were competitive, and that kind of switched things up a bit. But again, Booker's still the guy here getting most of the touches. And Josh Jacobs, who was dealing with a high ankle sprain, didn't have a single practice rep last week. We talk about it every year. High ankle sprains are terrible for running backs. They're really difficult to recover from. And if he doesn't practice a single time last week, you got to figure that he's questionable at very best this week. Probably needs at least a week of limited practice before he can get in. That won't happen. I expect Devontae Booker back again this week, full throttle. So we'll see how this goes. Something to monitor. Another situation that I want to monitor outside of Vegas is going to Philadelphia with Jalen Hurts at quarterback potentially. Is Miles Sanders. They signed Jordan Howard for whatever reason, activated him off the practice squad for whatever reason, gave him like 20% of the snaps for whatever reason. As a result, Miles Sanders saw his season low in snap counts. Is this something to worry about? Because, he hasn't really been getting the ball a ton, even in the last couple of games without Howard.
Yeah. You mentioned for whatever reason, and I think that is actually a key point here because I don't think we really know the reason why Miles Sanders' playing time is decreasing here or why they felt like they needed some more reinforcements at the position. But it's irrelevant, right? You laid out the actions. This is what the Eagles have done. We have seen the results a little bit. I think it is definitely time to ring the alarm bell with Miles Sanders. Something is going on here. He's clearly not right, or they're not impressed with him for whatever reason, and they're deciding to do some different things at the position here down the stretch. So it's really, really hard to trust Miles Sanders in DFS in a format where we need to feel pretty good about the running backs that we're putting in our lineups for a reliable volume of touches. He ain't getting that right now. And it's tough to watch because I think we're both Miles Sanders fans. I think we both think he's a great player. But for whatever reason, it's just not working out right now. So that's really how it goes with the Eagles as it stands today at running back. The Detroit Lions, another team I wanted to talk to you about really quickly before we move on. Really negative news with DeAndre Swift. It was kind of a pendulum last week. Swinging back and forth between he's activated, he's going to be good to go, and then he was downgraded with an illness. And I think we had some quotes from Adrian Peterson, I think, saying that even in practice, Swift just didn't look right. So I don't know how close he is to coming back. It could be this week. It might not be against the Packers. Who really knows here? If it's not this week for DeAndre Swift, It looks like interim head coach Bevel. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on his first name here.
Darrell Bevel, you got it.
Darrell Bevel. Yeah, thank you. He is a big fan of Adrian Peterson. He got 65% of the touches at running back, 16 carries to just 4 combined for both Kerryon and Jamal Agnew. If you want to place him in the running back room for them, he's sort of a hybrid player. So looks like it's going to be another heavy dose of Peterson with this coaching staff until DeAndre Swift can get back, Brian.
And the Packers, as we know, can be run on. This game has one of the highest totals of the week, as we'll get to here in a second. Peterson could get 100 yards and a touch here against the Pack, but we'll monitor DeAndre Swift. That is some scary news with what they were saying about his appearance. He did pass a concussion protocol. No one really knows what's going on. Again, we're recording this Tuesday, so we'll monitor his practice participation throughout the week. One final rookie running back to talk about before we get into the betting market analysis is Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who was active on Sunday night, didn't play a single snap, screwed everybody who played him in Showdown. But I don't know, Chris. I guess he's going to be fine. I think he had the flu last week, they said. I imagine he's back healthy this week, but again, something we don't know.
Yeah, I mean, fantasy players, it was, Clyde Edwards not there, cried Edwards-Helaire, died Edwards-Helaire. That's enough of that, right?
Jesus Christ.
It definitely just looks like it was one of those emergency activations for him in that Sunday night game against the Broncos. I think they're trying to be careful with him. He was legit sick, I guess, late in the week, so they just did not want to push it with him. He's still atop the depth chart, and perhaps more importantly, Brian, Le'Veon Bell didn't exactly do much to inspire much confidence in his own ability in his good long stretch against the Broncos there. So I think we can expect CEH here to go right back to the top of the depth chart against the Miami Dolphins, which leads us to the biggest favorites here in week 14. Very early in the week, obviously we want to watch these lines because they move a lot by Sunday. But as of right now, the largest favorite on this slate is the Seattle Seahawks getting 2 touchdowns. 2 touchdowns against the New York Jets. Probably fair. The Jets are really bad. Behind them, we have the Chiefs. They're 7.5-point favorites over the Dolphins. The Titans and the Packers are favored by the same, and the Saints are favored by the same amount against their opponents this week. And then we have the Tampa Bay Bucks favored by 6.5 points over the Vikings. Of all these teams that I just mentioned, Brian, the Seahawks, Chiefs, Seahawks, Chiefs, Titans, Packers, Saints, Bucks. What stands out to you? Do you have a spot that you're already sort of excited to dive into more and get into this week?
I think the first thing that came to mind was, all right, Seahawks just got taken to the brink and lost by the Giants at home, and now they're 14-point favorites over anyone. I know it's the Jets, but they did fire the defensive coordinator, so we'll see. Yeah. But again, lots of relatively large favorites this week, which isn't the best for stacking generally. But some big favorite running backs we can look at. Chris Carson splitting time, right, with Carlos Hyde. CEH we just hit on his unusual situation. Derrick Henry probably in the best spot of the entire week. And as we'll get to as we talk about totals and game stacks, he could be the single reason why that game stack doesn't work out, as he just rushes for like 250 yards and multiple scores. Then Aaron Jones, who played a little bit more last week than we had been seeing as a 7.5-point favorites now against the Lions. He could be another reason why that game stack doesn't go off if all the volume is concentrated on him. And then the big thing is Alvin Kamara against the Saints, Latavius Murray. We'll see who's under center. And then I think you did this on purpose, Chris, but the Bucks are 6.5-point favorites against the Vikings. You left out Ronald Jones here, who is their lead back and their early down thumper. So someone to keep in mind. But I think some of the mid-range running backs, particularly Austin Eckler, are more appealing this week than some of these higher price, or at least these bigger favorite running backs.
Yeah, this is a very, very intriguing week at running back, and I think there's going to be a lot of different directions we can go. There are some cheaper running backs that I'm actually really focused on because I think we might be trying to play some expensive game stacks at quarterback, receiver, tight end, hint, hint. So we're probably going to need these guys. And, knock on wood here because we are a little early with the take, but provided that he's still good to go in week 14 and nothing terrible happens against the Baltimore Ravens, we do have Ezekiel Elliott against the Cincinnati Bengals, who are just reeling right now. I mean, they've got a complete disaster going on at quarterback. They have not really been able to be super competitive with anybody since Joe Burrow went out for the year. That, to me, smells like a big day for Ezekiel Elliott. He's a very affordable running back on the Week 14 slate on both FanDuel and DraftKings. we already know about James Robinson. He's getting all of the touches for these Jaguars. He'll again be in the mix for a high volume of touches in week 14. Flop leg spot with Austin Eckler. Man, we really, that was tough. I mean, we were all in on Austin Eckler. I was anyway. I think you had him in a pretty important spot as well. And just, you don't see a team losing by 7 touchdowns. That's just ridiculous. Certainly probably fair to not expect it to happen 2 times in a row. So understand Eckler is still playing a lot, probably going to get his. And then we already talked about him a little bit ago, Myles Gaskin with the Dolphins in that high pace game against the Chiefs. Those guys, I think, will be a lot of them will be who we mix in high risk, but there's probably some low risk appeal there as well. Might see more of those guys in your lineups this week than the higher priced guys that are huge favorites, as we were just talking about.
Yeah, I mean, real quick though, I will say Austin Eckler in like literally the worst possible scenario still scored like 10 DraftKings points. So
yeah, had 9 targets, I think, still. So gotta love the volume there. I'm not really concerned with it. I think Eckler is good to go. It's just Anthony Lynn was just completely overmatched by Bill Belichick. I think we did talk about this a little bit in our staff chat. I mean, flip the head coaches there. The Chargers literally probably win that game, maybe by 7 touchdowns, right? I mean, it's just so just kind of throw the game tape out, so to speak, on that one, and just look at the matchup for the Chargers here against the Falcons. Falcons haven't necessarily had the greatest defense all year. Should be a really good spot for Austin Eckler.
Yeah, I agree. So let's talk about some of these high total games that Atlanta and Chargers game is mixed in here. What's interesting to me, all right, the calendar is turned to December. We've talked in the past about second divisional matchups and what that means for mostly the passing games, but scoring in general. And we generally see a 10 to 15 to 20% drop, depending on the circumstances, of passing games expected points based on their season averages. So a lot of times we love stacking games, but there can be some downside or at least some risk and overexposure by the field in tournaments to some of these larger total divisional games if these teams have already played. And Chris, to me, this week looks like the situation where we might have a huge edge on the field because the 2 biggest total games, Green Bay and Detroit, 55.5 points, the largest of the week, and Tennessee and Jacksonville, 53.5 points, are divisional rivals. These teams have played already this year. We should see a decrease in the passing game expectations, which would be bad for game stacks, which means some of these next tier of games would be the ones we want to target.
Yeah, let's talk about these 2 games a little bit more before we get into that. I mean, I think what might be driving this, and I agree with you, I think this is a spot for us to probably go in a different direction in high risk. Modelers, bookmakers, whatever, right? They're definitely looking at these advanced statistics for the quarterbacks. They're looking at a guy like Aaron Rodgers, who's throwing a touchdown on almost 9% of his passes this year, which is insane. They're looking at a guy like Ryan Tannehill, who's throwing a touchdown pass on 7% of his passes this year. A lot lower than Rodgers, but still insane. So when you go and try and project some of these offenses like the Packers and the Titans that are favored in these spots, I mean, it's going to probably show that they're going to score a lot of touchdowns raw math wise, which probably isn't correct because it's just we say this all the time. I feel like when we do these shows, someone is doing something unsustainable. These quarterbacks are unsustainable the way that they are just passing for touchdowns so efficiently. That should come back down to earth. Enough nerd talk here, right, on that. I mean, the average touchdown rate is probably somewhere between 4 and 5% for quarterbacks. That's just how much these guys are overperforming. When they're facing a defense that has already seen them once this year, you can bet that they've done something to try and figure them out. And so I think that means we should look a little more towards the Buccaneers and the Vikings, a 52.5 point total game. The Colts and the Raiders, a 51 point total game. The Falcons and the Chargers, 49.5 points. The Kansas City Chiefs and the Miami Dolphins, 48.5. The Panthers and the Broncos. We've got some interesting receivers on both sides there. So these are definitely games that the field is probably going to overlook because you're going to probably see a lot of people more than happy to play Aaron Rodgers, Matthew Stafford, Ryan Tannehill, and for whatever reason, Mike Glennon even potentially, right? So
yeah,
there you go.
Exactly. So, I mean, some interesting games to target this week. And generally, this part of the show will transition to our underperforming receiver section. But because it is so early in the week, we don't have the data just yet. Can't give you a full list. So here's an easy plug for you. Go check out OccupyFantasy.com. Friday night, Chris will have the daily plug written up with the top plays for the week. how to build lineups for this particular slate on FanDuel and DraftKings. And then, of course, he'll list the underperforming receivers with a couple notes for this week. So no underperformers this week. So, Chris, since we just talked about the game totals, why don't we talk about your favorite game stacks this week, and then we'll finish off with the tight ends, since it's a little natural transition here. So we talked about the high totals, the divisional matchups. So who are you looking at then if you're thinking about stacking games and tournaments this week?
Start right with kind of the first game that was on the list as a different option. To me, I really like the Vikings and the Buccaneers this week. You got Tom Brady off a bye, so he's probably gotten enough sleep. He's probably good to go. Old man's ready to play. Should be a good game. Kirk Cousins, look, man, he's able to feed these receivers. He's throwing the ball deep downfield, and that has made both Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen very stackable all year long. Dalvin Cook, we just know what he's doing now, right? I mean, they want to get him some rest, but they just can't do it. They're giving him basically all of the running back work, and didn't get a touchdown last week, but still ended up with like 26 fantasy points on an outrageous amount of touches. I know the game went to overtime, so that skews it, but the volume there, again, very easily stackable offense. I feel like we talk about that concept and the Vikings every week. That's why they're always in this section. People are going to probably ask everyone a lot about those two divisional games that we just talked about. I did have some thoughts on them, even though they're not really on my radar at this point. With the Tennessee Titans, Brian, I think most people are going to go to AJ Brown as their top receiver. And I think they should probably start thinking about going to Corey Davis instead. He's been balling out the last few weeks, had that huge game against the Browns. I mean, what do you think there? I mean, I'm not saying not to play AJ Brown, so don't misunderstand me. I just think that we're probably underestimating just how involved Corey Davis is here. And he may have internally leapfrogged AJ Brown a little bit on their priority list.
I mean, when we're thinking about game stacks, we're always looking towards these secondary and tertiary options in the passing games because, one, we can't just play all the expensive players. It doesn't work out. And as we talked about in our Twitch stream a couple weeks ago, we want to get at least one cheap player generally from a stack into our lineup. Corey Davis, I don't know how cheap he's going to stay for long because his volume's right up there, his opportunity right up there with A.J. Brown, and even surpassing him this past week. Brown did turn his ankle too. Did return to the game against the Browns, but we know how those are. We'll see how he responds in practice this week. But, I mean, these are the types of situations to look at when you are stacking, if you do decide to stack this game, Corey Davis over A.J. Brown. And then as we get late in the year and they're in evaluation mode, the Jags, Colin Johnson played more than fellow rookie Laviska, 65% routes run to just 35%. And then if we're talking about Detroit, we got Mohamed Sanu getting reps over some of these younger guys. So especially towards the end of the year, following these trends and seeing which receivers are leapfrogging the others on the depth chart can be massive, massive, massive for game stacks. I'll just say personally for Cleveland this past week, knowing that Rashard Higgins was number 2, knowing that Kadero Hodge was out as their number 3, that really solidified Higgins as the number 2, was perfect for game stacks this week. And if we can identify those types of situations within even lower owned game stacks, then that's how you get lineups towards the top of the leaderboard.
So let's get into that a little bit with one of the most popular teams in the NFL, one of, I think, the smartest teams to stack this week. We've got the Kansas City Chiefs and the Miami Dolphins playing here in week 14. I think it makes sense to have exposure to the Chiefs on a main slate. I think you're borderline insane if you don't want any exposure to Patrick Mahomes and what he's doing right now. We can get a little different, right? By taking, everybody's going to try to get Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce. There's plenty of options though on this Chiefs roster, right? To try and get a little different. You can pick one of those guys and you can go with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, the running back, let's say. You can go with Sammy Watkins or Demarcus Robinson at wide receiver, right? So I don't think many people are going to necessarily do that, but I do think there's a lot of high risk appeal there. And the Dolphins, I think they bring enough to the table on their own to make this really interesting going both ways with it.
Yeah, and I just want to hit on this really quickly, right? Like, even if your cheap player in a stack doesn't go off, you can still win a tournament. And especially if you follow our contest selection advice and you're playing 100-player leagues, you can easily win a 100-player league. I mean, we saw in the DraftKings Millionaire this past week, Brandon Adams, who I think is pretty well known in DFS and poker and whatever, he finished, I think, 3rd and 4th in the Millie, and he ran back the Jets with Perriman, who scored like 3 points, and he still finished 3rd in the Millie. So it goes to show, even though you're a cheap stack player doesn't go off. He has the correlated upside with your quarterbacks in your game stacks in that high scoring environment. Plus, it allows you to pay up at other positions. So I like the idea of using McCole Hardman, Demarcus Robinson, Sammy Watkins. On Miami side, obviously you talked about Devontae Parker, Mike Gesicki, these types of guys. So just something to keep in mind. I just want to hit on this, especially as we get late in the season, Chris.
I am sure that Brandon Adams really wishes that Brashad Perriman did a little bit more there, Brian. But yes, you are right on point there. That is absolutely good to bring up. Didn't put it on our show notes, but other game that I do like, waiting on the quarterback news. I do on both sides, I guess. The Saints and the Eagles is kind of interesting to me. Feels like not a lot of people are going to talk about that for the reason that the quarterbacks are kind of uncertain with both sides, but a lot of great players on both those rosters to try and work into your lineups. And tight ends are important in terms of trying to get these game stacks to work, particularly the cheap ones that we can identify that are in great spots, which, Brian, it took 13 weeks.
Are we back? Is this
And
now
it-
the
and-
Logan Thomas section again?
And it wasn't even on a main slate, which is frustrating. But Logan Thomas went out there and he did the damn thing, man. He got 9 targets, 9 receptions, 98 yards, and a touchdown against the Pittsburgh Steelers. He was in the winning 2-game slate millionaire maker lineup. He was in like all of my lineups, got a lot of satellite tickets because of Logan Thomas and obviously Josh Allen and everybody else involved. But very happy to see
mostly Logan Thomas.
very happy to see Logan finally paying off. The reason we start off this section with Logan Thomas, I don't think a lot of people are going to be playing him in week 14, but he's just 3,300 on DraftKings, 5,200 on FanDuel. And we've been saying this a lot this season. He ran the most routes per quarterback drop back at the tight end position. If you are looking for a cheap player to make your highly correlated game stack lineup work, Logan Thomas is going to be sitting right there almost every time for you at tight end. If you are stacking some of the games we just talked about, you may be using tight ends. 2 guys that we like are obviously Travis Kelce and Mike Gesicki with the Dolphins. Gesicki getting the second most targets. I think he's still behind Devontae Parker, but he is challenging Devontae Parker for that number 1 spot on Tua Tagovailoa's pecking order, if you will. So both those guys have high risk appeal, and since they're facing each other, Brian, I think it's the rare opportunity where in a main slate, it's slightly better to use 2 tight ends. I'll put it that way. I don't think we love using double tight end in classic slates, but I can understand it if you're stacking that game, right?
Yeah, exactly. And we definitely hate on the 2 tight end lineups pretty much every single week at this point. I think a 2 tight end lineup actually took down the Millie this past week, so joke's on us. But when you have 2 tight ends in game stacks that at least one can operate as basically a receiver like Travis Kelce does, and apparently like Mike Gesicki is now, it's not as bad because you get the added correlation and they're getting receiver-esque volume. Plus, it allows you to play more underperforming receivers outside of your game stack. So, I think this is the rare opportunity to play Gesicki and Kelce in a 2 tight end game stack lineup together. Any other guys that we want to think about this week for tight end?
Yeah, I mean, if it's not clear to you that Darren Waller is the number 1 receiver for the Las Vegas Raiders at this point, you should probably just quit DFS. I mean, after a 200-yard game, I mean, everybody's probably going to be on this guy. They're going to see that he's cheaper than Travis Kelce, and they're probably just going to click the button. And, against the Colts, it's probably a high-risk only spot for me, Brian. It's a really tough defense. They rank 5th defending the position this year. And I'm not sure I want to chase a 48-point fantasy point production type game from Darren Waller. Still going to be a good play if you're, stacking that game for whatever reason, right? But I think I'm going to go in a different direction entirely. I like Evan Engram again. I mean, he's still running a ton of routes, getting a ton of targets for the Giants. Believe he's still the target and air yard leader for them over the last several weeks. A lot of that has to do with Colt McCoy being the quarterback this past game, and he's just not very good. So they get Daniel Jones back. Obviously, it makes it even better. But even if it's another McCoy game, I still think Evan Engram is more than fine here against the Arizona Cardinals in Week 14. Before we wrap up the show, don't forget about Jacob Hollister. I don't think Greg Olsen is going to be ready to return for the Seattle Seahawks here. I don't think Will Dissly is a real threat to the volume. And I mean, we were just talking about him. We just saw what Darren Waller did to this Jets defense at the tight end position. Jacob Hollister now gets that matchup. So certainly someone to probably mix into your allocations this week.
You got like a tight end on a 14-point favorite with that high team total. So I like that Hollister call as well, Chris. Good stuff this week. For more detailed thoughts, the top plays for the entire week, the top game stacks, how to build your lineups, and of course our famous underperforming wide receivers list. You want to check out the daily plug, occupyfantasy.com. That drops Friday evenings, generally by 8 p.m. Eastern. Again, occupyfantasy.com is where you can get that. Also this Friday, special date because the NBA preseason starts back up, which means we'll be having our preseason daily plug, news and notes, breaking news, and players to target. Our guys Garrett and Tommy will be on that. Go to occupyfantasy.com. You'll get more information on Friday for the NBA preseason content. So be sure to subscribe. If you're watching this on YouTube, just click that subscribe button. Or if you're listening in your favorite podcast app, do it there. That way you get notified when all of our episodes are released of the Occupy Fantasy Football Podcast. So for Chris, I'm Brian. Appreciate everyone listening this week. Good luck, and we'll talk to you next week.